Are you caffeinated? Good. So I thank you all for attending, and I hope that this morning and this morning's conversations are going to be stimulating and provocative. The title of my presentation is Inclusion as a Growth Catalyst, and I'm going to go down a very narrow lane, which I'm going to explain to you in a moment. But the first thing I want to tell you is a little bit about who I'm not. So first of all, I'm not an eco-warrior. I'm not a radical progressive. I'm not an angry feminist. But I am a business person, a growth strategist, and I'm a very firm believer in conscious capitalism. So I just want you to know that that was in my presentation before Raj gave his incredible keynote speech yesterday. All of this is to tell you that I'm not here to lecture you about inclusion. I'm here to make an economic argument. I'm here to make an economic argument for inclusion. And I'm coming at this in my perspective as really a professional and a business person. As Carolina introduced me, I am a strategic marketing advisor. I've been doing this for over 25 years, and I'm also very fortunate to be part of an organization called Be Peace. And my team here from Be Peace is in El Salvador is joining. Be Peace is an award-winning nonprofit, and I've been involved in Be Peace for over 10 years. This is my 4th time in your country, so thank you for welcoming me back. Let me just tell you a little bit about what Be Peace believes and what we do, because that has an impact on what I'm going to talk about today. The fundamental belief we have at Be Peace is that a decent job is the bridge to a better life for everyone, everywhere. That's kind of hard to argue with. Be Peace has spent the last 20 plus years doing that in crisis-affected zones of the world. We were founded after 9/11 and did our first work in Afghanistan. After that, we went to Rwanda, we've worked in the Lebanon, and for the past 10 years, we've been working in Central America. And we work as volunteers to help small and medium-sized businesses create jobs. Our KPI is job creation. And just to give you a sense of the impact that we have in partnership with the businesses we help, in 2023, we worked with 189 businesses in this region, mostly El Salvador, a little bit in Guatemala, some in the United States and Honduras. In that time, we helped create 11,700 jobs. But what's really important about those jobs is that they support 47,000 family members. So each job has a multiplier effect, as you all know. But importantly, they also contribute almost $500 million to the local economies where they operate. So this is important because that's what inclusion allows you to do. Is it allows you to create more opportunity and more jobs, and therefore create economic prosperity. So today's presentation, as I said, I'm going to walk in a very narrow lane. We talked about the E, the S, and the G, and I'm going to focus specifically on the S, and really specifically in the lane of social inclusion. So what are we going to cover? There's 4 sections to this presentation. I'm going to give you a brief introduction to inclusion. I'm looking in this room, and I'm very happy to see that it's very balanced in terms of gender. I'm also impressed that it's a young group. You're young. I was expecting there to be a lot more silver hair. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the business case for inclusion, and just to give you some data points that can really illustrate the numbers, the upside for inclusion. I have a couple of examples to inspire us. What's important, though, is that you're going to hear lots of examples in the panel, in the subsequent conversations today. So I'm going to keep my list of examples quite edited. And then just some parting thoughts from me in terms of what is the opportunity for this region and some provocation for you to think about. I see that most of you, as I say, are young. You have to go back and convince the people that run your companies to pay attention. So hopefully I'll give you some ammunition. Okay, let's start. A brief introduction to inclusion. So what is social inclusion? Well, in its fundamental sense, it's the process of improving the terms on which individuals and groups take part in a society. And really, it's about providing opportunity and dignity to those who are disadvantaged on the basis of their identity. So it's really about creating a level playing field. Specifically, I'm going to talk about workplace inclusion. So that's the societal definition. But in the workplace, it's about how workplace experiences and the degree to which organizations embrace all employees and enable them to make meaningful contributions. So it's about making a level playing field in society, but also making a level playing field in the workplace. There are all sorts of different types of inclusion. Gender inclusion, which is really what I'm going to focus on specifically. 60%, north of 60% of the companies that we work with at BPeace are women-owned. So that's an area of expertise for us. But there are different types of inclusion. Age inclusion. I jokingly talked about the silver economy. There's so many jobs and job descriptions out there that are looking for young, energetic people. Well, what does that say to the rest of us? You know, we're still energetic, we're just not young. Another type of inclusion, and I'm so delighted that we have this lady here to represent this conversation with sign language, is disability inclusion, is the way in which assumptions are made about people who have physical or neurodiversity in their ability, and how that creates and closes doors for them, and that's very unfair. And then, of course, there's cultural inclusion. Indigenous peoples, people of different cultural identities, and how they are often left out of the workplace. And there are lots of different types of inclusion, but I'm going to walk in a very narrow lane, and that is the lane of gender inclusion. So let's kind of look a little bit at the numbers, because I can make the moral argument, but I want to make an economic argument. And so what this chart shows is the participation of women in the workforce. And as you can see, in the region, we're between 41 and 50%. And the reason I put Peru and Paraguay on this page is in all of the southern part of the Americas, Peru has the highest female participation. And Paraguay is interesting because it's a country of about the same size of population as El Salvador. So it's just an interesting comparison. But just take a pause for a minute and just think about this. More than half of your women over the age of 15 are not in the workforce. That's astonishing. I think that's astonishing. To give you a little bit of context, that number in the United States is about 58%, and worldwide it's about 47%, just to give you a little sense. So you're sort of in the global average. What's interesting, though, is when you look now at how that translates to GDP per capita. So this is gross domestic gross domestic product per individual in the country. And this is where it starts to become interesting, because you can see where your region is. And then if you look at the best in class in all of Latin America, you see that Peru has 20% more women in the workforce than El Salvador. And then you say, well, Peru is much bigger, we can't really make a comparison. But let's look at Paraguay. They also have around 6 to 7 million inhabitants in their population. Their workforce participation is quite above the global average, at 60%, and their GDP per capita is also elevated. When I did a little bit of the math, and by the way, I'm terrible at math, so there are 35% more women in the workforce in Paraguay, a comparable country, and do you think it's just a coincidence that their GDP per capita is also 30% more? So you see, there is a connection between women's participation in an economy and the GDP of that economy. But here's the truth. Economic rights are not evenly distributed around the world. 32%, so 1 in 3 women around the world do not have the same economic rights as men. And there's a lot of different reasons for this. For example, access to education, access to finance, limited land ownership. 20% of the world's land is owned by women. 20%. Things like access to legal services and financial services. 55% of unbanked individuals around the world are women. And then finally, also things like the digital divide. I was astonished to find this. 35% of women around the world do not use the internet. Can you imagine? 1 in 3, more than 1 in 3 women around the world does not have internet access. We have to change that. We have to change that economically as well as morally. And workplace inclusion can and does change lives, and it changes societies. So that's what I want to talk about. And I think some of you may know this famous quote, and I believe this truth to this, which is that women's rights are human rights. Thank you, Hillary Clinton. Okay, let's talk business. So this is a beautiful graphic. I didn't create it, but it's a very sobering graphic. The thing here is showing what it will take for us to get to gender parity globally. And the Global Gender Gap Report is the longest running report into the disparity between genders, and it's been going on since about 2006, and it looks at 4 factors: economic participation, education, health, and political empowerment. So there's a bunch of different factors in here. And what I think is really interesting is Latin America and the Caribbean region is winning. Yes, we will have gender parity in this region in only 53 years, right? We don't mind, do we, ladies? 53 years from now, it'll be a level playing field between the regions, and we're going to be first. I pity those in East Asia. They have to wait 189 years. I hope they're patient. The other thing I think many of you are aware of is when it comes to gender parity, that women earn 20% less, a minimum of 20% less around the world than their male counterparts. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but gentlemen, your sisters and daughters are going to earn 80% of what their male colleagues are earning. Imagine that. in 2024 and beyond. This lost potential, this absolute waste of potential, is costing us all. And we pay for it through poverty. We pay for it through food insecurity, through job insecurity, through limited entrepreneurship. And of course, the most vulnerable populations in the climate argument are women. So we all pay for it. When we have fewer women participating in the workforce, we all suffer. We all somehow pay a price for it. What is the opportunity cost? In business, we often talk about the opportunity cost of doing something. It's almost 10% of the world's output. $10 trillion. I had to look up how many zeros that is. It's 12, by the way. $10 trillion is lost because we don't have full participation of women in the workplace. So what does that mean for us? When more women work, economies grow. A study was done by the International Labour Organization and Gallup, and they asked women across the globe if they preferred to work in paid jobs, care for their families, or do both. And 70% of women, regardless of whether they were working or not working, prefer to work. Women want to work. We're highly motivated to work. When GDP and wealth increases, all boats rise. And this is important. You know, this is not about some people winning and some people losing. We all win. And ultimately, female economic empowerment benefits everybody. When women thrive in the world of work, they have more power and agency in their lives. They lift the prospects of their children. One of the best indications of a child's success is the success of the mother. And then there are all sorts of other consequences that come with that: less violence, more social and political participation, more leadership, etc., etc. So when women work, economies grow. And there are many benefits of inclusion in the workplace. The first is different perspectives bring innovation and creativity. It seems obvious, right? That when diverse teams are tackling questions and topics and problems, they're going to bring different perspectives and different angles to the solutions. The second is around employee engagement and retention. And when I speak to all of my clients, the battle for talent is one of the great battles of our time. The battle to attract talent and to retain talent across different industries. And when workplaces are inclusive, people have a greater sense of belonging and a greater sense of satisfaction. Better decisions are made because different people are looking at the problem from different perspectives, and as a result, the blind spots are minimized. When you have a diverse workforce, you have the potential to reach different audiences, to reach different markets. And ultimately, when you do this right, all of these practices reflect positively on your enterprise, improving your company's image, improving your reputation. Here are just some examples to illustrate this. I just took some notes so that I can share these with you. So the first thing is to say that, you know, employee engagement, when there's more gender diversity, increases over almost 50%. Innovation increases almost 20%. At the same time, we're talking about business. Organizations in the top quartile for ethnic and racial diversity have 35% more better financial results. So there are business benefits to inclusion. And that's what I implore you to think about, is how can my business and how can my organization benefit from more inclusion? But that's all numbers. Let's make it personal. Because what's important about work and the dignity of work is that it changes lives. And these 4 ways in which a woman's life are changed are quite profound. Yes, when you have a job, your life materially changes. You have a better standard of living because you have economic empowerment. But then something happens to your cognitive ability. Suddenly you're acquiring new skills, new knowledge. And we all know that when we have more skills and more knowledge, our world opens. We have more relational power. We have more autonomy. We are able to make more decisions for ourselves. So there's a real change both in the way we interact with others and the way others see us when we're in the world of work. And then finally, and I think this is perhaps the most important change, is there's a perceptual change, a self-perceptual change in women. Self-confidence grows. And when you're not thinking about today's emergency and tomorrow's problems, you can start to think about the future. You can start to dream a little bit. So work changes lives, not just economically, but very personally as well. And as I've said repeatedly, when everyone is included, everyone wins. I'm going to share a couple of examples with you, a couple of examples that are sort of more international. And then I think it's really important for you to know that you have great examples right here in this country of inclusion. So let's celebrate those. Okay. So the first one, because I'm a marketer, is I'm going to share a marketing example with you. And I'm very proud to say that 23 years ago, my team helped Unilever really understand and unlock the strategy, the marketing strategy behind Dove. And raise your hands if you know the story of Dove, the campaign for real beauty. Okay, so about 1/3 of the people in this room. So I want to tell you a little bit about the story behind Dove and the reinvention of Dove. When I first started working with Dove, it was about a $400 million business and largely a bar of soap. And the company had an ambition to grow and to become a beauty brand. And so we looked at the marketplace, we looked at the competition, and we quickly saw that in order to be a beauty brand, you have to have aspiration, you have to be in the hair care and the face care space, because everything beneath the neck is more personal cleaning than it is beauty. And so we started a journey to really kind of understand what is the opportunity. And I'll never forget going around the world doing research with women and hearing this idea, but hearing these very specific words from women, which is, I'd rather look happy and healthy than flawless and perfect. But most beauty brands keep telling me that I need to look like a supermodel to feel beautiful. It's like a conspiracy against us. Now, some of you are too young to know this, but if I wind the clock back to that time, the big players, L'Oréal, Estée Lauder, Procter & Gamble, Beiersdorf, they were all using the same playbook. Claudia Schiffer, Naomi Campbell, Kate Moss, whoever was the Giselle Bündchen, whoever was the supermodel du jour was the cover and the face of those brands. And what we advised Unilever is it's very expensive. It's very, very expensive to participate in the beauty category. You're not going to win by finding the latest, skinniest, prettiest supermodel. You have to do something different. And just so you know, the only one who likes a change is a wet baby. Most companies do not love change. And so we had to convince them that it was in their best interest to change. It was in their best interest to take a different approach. And so through a range of different conversations with them and analysis and so on and so forth, my team recommended the concept, the strategy of real beauty. And I want to tell you a little anecdote, which I wasn't personally involved in, but I love because I think it's a great example of how you have to be subversive to get what you want sometimes in this world. So the board of Unilever was a bunch of guys, and the team wanted the company, the board, to invest in Dove, and that was a big financial investment. And so initially, the conversations were like, why are we investing? We're making plenty of money with soap. Yeah, maybe we can launch shampoo or something. That'll be fine. But the team at Unilever, the Dove team, had bigger ambitions. And so when they presented the strategy, they said, how are we going to not just appeal to the head, not just appeal to the business people in the room, but to the heart? And so what they did was they took video cameras into the homes of the board without telling them and talked to their daughters and said to them, what do you think of this idea that the beauty industry is a conspiracy against women? How do you feel about yourself? How do you feel about your own beauty? And these girls were very honest. They were basically saying all of this, the beauty industry wants me to look flawless and perfect, and that's impossible to achieve. I just want to be the best version of myself. And it was very emotional. So the team then brought this video to the board. They made their strategic presentation. They said, no, wait, we want to show you a little video. And then they put the video on. And all the men were crying because they could see what an emotional impact this idea had on their daughters. And at the end of the meeting, my client said, they were like, where do I sign? Where do I sign? Where do I give you the investment? So I tell you that story not because I was involved, but sometimes in order to change the conversation, to get the investment you want, be creative. And why I think this is a masterclass in inclusion. Full disclosure, I was not involved in the campaign development, but I was involved in the strategy development. But I love the way in which they have done this consistently for 20 years. Until this point, beauty ads never had real women in them. And they certainly never had women of different shapes, different colors, different ethnicities. I always loved this one. This lady is a South African lady. She's like 78 years old. I think the oldest person that had ever been in a beauty ad until then was like 24. And they've done a really great job from young girls to older girls. And what's important in the work they've done with young girls is they really understood that self-esteem, self-confidence was under attack because of the beauty industry. And so they've done a lot of work to really help with girls' self-esteem. The whole problem with social media and young girls. They're really sort of champions of that. This is a really interesting example. The project here is called the Crown Act. And in the United States, black women suffer quite a lot of discrimination because of their hair. So they can't assume that they can just go to an interview with their hair the way it is. And Dove worked with policymakers, and they passed a legislation that says that black women no women can be discriminated against because of their hair. So for example, this woman goes to an interview with her hair like this, and is sort of seen as unprofessional, unpolished. She straightens her hair and normalizes her hair, and all of a sudden, she gets the job. That is something that Dove has helped to champion. And there are all sorts of other stories of how they've done this. But I bring this to you as an example of inclusion. When you do that intentionally, and when you invest in it, and you're consistent behind it, today Dove is more than a $5 billion business. Okay? So there's an economic argument for inclusion. Another example is, I think, a really tactical example, but I think it illustrates that everything doesn't have to be a whole repositioning of a brand. It's about looking at different populations within your organization and creating programs that might help them. So many women in the workplace take a break in order to have their children or to care for family members. And so PepsiCo has created this program called Ready to Return. And it's a program that invites people who've taken 2 years out of the workplace, minimum of 2 years, to come back and experience their next chapter. So we've all heard of internships, but this is a program where they have returnships. And it's a 4-month program that helps people update their skills, update their resume with new experience, make some new connections within the organization, participate and contribute in a team, and then possibly see if there are opportunities that fit their profile. And I thought this was a great example of the ways in which we can be more inclusive. Just because somebody's had to step out of the workforce for family or personal reasons doesn't mean that we should assume that they're unemployable. They very much are. We need to create systems and tools and programs that help people back into the workforce. And then a couple of local examples. So I'm very fortunate because I've worked as a mentor to one of the employees at ACI. ACI is an NGO, a kind of cooperative that offers microcredit to Salvadorans. And it's been around since 1990. It has 270 employees, of whom 70% are female. It has 25,000 borrowers, of whom 80% are female. By the way, women pay debts back better than men, just saying. And then now this organization is offering healthcare services in remote areas, especially to women. So they have mobile health clinics that go into the most remote regions of your country. There are amazing examples already in this country of how inclusion is creating better opportunities for your people. Another example, and I think she may be here, I'm a fangirl, is a very renowned designer. I think she's a great ambassador for your country, is Lula Mena. And some of you may know the story of Lula Mena, but she has beautiful handcrafted accessories and home textiles that are really made using techniques that have existed, artisanal techniques that have existed for hundreds of years in this country and that have been lost over time. She's helped revive those techniques by working with over 100 female artisans And in doing that, she's really created an incredible amount of economic empowerment for women. The women that work for Lula Mena earn up to 3 times more than their husbands. And the reason that's important is that means that they can send their children to school. At this time, they're just about to celebrate the 3rd generation of high school graduates as a result of the investment and the work that Lula Mena's team has been doing. And I think you are all very familiar with this. Almost 300 people per day are looking to emigrate to the United States. And when people have opportunity at home, they're inspired to stay at home. They feel compelled to stay. And that's one of the benefits of the work that Lula Mena and the Lula Mena Foundation have been really bringing to your country. So I just want you to remember that all the examples aren't out there somewhere else. They're also already right here in your country. Okay, I'm just about to finish. What is the opportunity here for Central America? I think I've probably said this many times already, but empowering women is essential to the health, the social development of our families, of our communities, and our countries. When women are working and living safe, fulfilled, and productive lives, they contribute their skills to the workforce, they raise happier and healthier children, and they can reach their full potential. So I want to leave you with some parting thoughts. The first is, inclusion doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't just happen. You have to prioritize it. You have to make it something that is important and an area of focus within your organization. We manage what we measure. So it's really important that we remain accountable when we make a commitment to inclusion. What are the KPIs? The KPIs for your organization may be different than the KPIs for a multinational. So let's figure out what it is that's important when it comes to gender inclusion, and let's make sure we have meaningful KPIs that we can remain accountable to. The third point here is that the one who adapts his policy to the time prospers. The policies that were created, maybe even pre-pandemic, 20 years ago, need to be revisited. The assumptions need to be revisited. We need to think about what are the policies, returnships, for example, that are going to help get the balance right to include more women in the workplace. But it's not only policy that makes a difference. If you want to have workplaces where inclusion really succeeds, you need policies and you need people. You need ambassadors, champions, and sponsors for the idea of inclusion. And that's important that it comes not just from the top down, but also from the bottom up. So find people and develop policies that make inclusion the new normal. What's also important is that the management practices of inclusive workforce don't just sort of work on the soft stuff, not the fluffy stuff, but they are really things that matter. Again, returnships is a tangible idea that matters. There are a number of different ways in which we can cater to the needs and the realities of women in the workplace. Focus on the few important areas as opposed to the sort of soft areas that don't really have a return on investment. And then finally, personal experience of inclusion is really critical to win the war for talent. When people go for an interview, if they see somebody like themselves, if they speak to somebody who may have a similar background to themselves, they're much more likely to join a company. So it's not just about policies, it's also about personal commitment and personal stories. And with that, I will say that when we fight for women, we fight for our future, we fight for all of us. So thank you very much. It's been my pleasure.